Welcome to Stories Worth Telling. Today I'm so excited. I have my friend and colleague Barry Sheckley with me. And Barry has quite a curriculum vitae, so he was able to send it to me. He, of course, has his PhD and has published several different literature, topics, and reviews on the topic of education. He is an educational specialist, has done a lot of research. He is an emeritus professor of education, University of Connecticut Stores. He has done research on how individuals can learn best, reskilling the adult workforce. He got his PhD at the University of Connecticut, a master's at St. Mary's University in Texas, a Bachelor of Science at Trinity in Connecticut as well, and is active, has been on the support team for some of our educational forces that have gone on at the governor's level. So I am so proud and excited that I have you here with me today, Barry. So thank you so much for being with me today. Now, Barry, I know you and I have conversations because we work hard and well together, I think. So you do have quite an extensive research-oriented background in education. And why, first of all, is educational research important? Why do we need to do that? Don't we just put kids in a room and don't they just learn?
I guess it's a very interesting question, and I'm very admire you. It's like how easily you go into this. Here I'm sitting here like sweating bullets thinking on TV, and you're just like so easily like running into this thing.
Well, you and I are friends,
you know.
and I know it's just like we've talked. We've had hours of conversations at this point, right?
But the thing about there's so much. There's an old joke about when three people get together. If two doctors are talking together, two medical doctors are talking at a cocktail party, and a third person walks up, you now have two medical doctors and a third person. Or if you have two lawyers and a third person, a third person walks up, now it's two lawyers and a third person. If two educators are talking at a cocktail party and a third person walks up, now you have three educators.
Oh,
Because
interesting.
almost everybody has experienced, the classroom and the education process, and so it's like how I did it is the way it should continually be done. And there's
well, the interesting research behind that is that schools were built in a time when it was an agronomy society, right? So we had our summers off so that if your father was a farmer, you could be in the fields helping to plow and cut the wheat and do all those things that need to go on in the farm.
Actually, one of the early reform people in the area of education, his name is Ivan Illich, worked off of Paulo Freire's work, and a great book called Deschooling Society. And in his book, he set out the premise is that schools are primarily set up to support industrialized behavior, because what the country needed in the early parts of the industrial era were people that would kind of like sit in place, stay in lines, follow a schedule, and do what they were told. And so that's what schools were set up to do. They were
answer to the bell, the bells would ring, that kind of thing. My brother homeschooled his kids, and my joke with him was, how are they ever going to learn how to line up? They're just going to think you just kind of walk and get whatever you want, because that's what it's like when you homeschool.
So one of the things I did was I became interested in the question of, how do kids learn best, and really how does learning happen? And I looked at a lot of the research that was coming forth on the brain and how the brain actually worked, and then tried to translate that into practice to say, okay, if this is really how the brain works, how the brain thinks, how the brain reasons and makes decisions, here's how we should translate that knowledge into helping people learn better. And kind of a short answer or a short thing I found out was that the way we do most education does not match how the brain actually seems to work.
Oh, tell me, how does the brain work? Because I think the brain is so fascinating.
Yeah, it's very, very complex organ, and we actually, if anybody ever says they start to say this is how the brain works,
don't believe them.
They're wrong. Don't believe them.
Yeah.
Because nobody knows how it works. It's
and each brain
wonderful.
Works differently, if I am understanding.
And all we know is that, we know the structures of the brain, and we can tell basically how the structures of the brain work, and kind of what happens, in terms of when we learn something, there are actually physiological changes,
right.
At the individual neuron level.
Right.
And it's all kind of based on the bodily reactions. It's based upon our experiences, because all the brain ever does is record the state of our body and what happens to our body. And then it has this marvelous ability that we really don't understand of how to convert stimuli that come into the body into consciousness.
Nice.
And that's there's kind of
It's fuzzy.
we don't really know how that happens, but we know it does happen, and we know that there's some very astute physiological changes that occur that enable that. And there's actually the brain is all just about connectivity. We have billions and millions of neurons from our head to the toe, and they all connect and are able to work with each other, and that's kind of like how the whole process works.
So my understanding, though, is that it's all about making those connections and having that rehearsal and having that practice. For instance, my granddaughter is 2 years old. We took her down by the water, and I said, Claire, the water goes gurgle, gurgle, gurgle. So she said gurgle, gurgle, gurgle. So then later on, when I'm giving her a bath, I'm like, the water here goes splash, splash, but the water by the river goes gurgle, gurgle, gurgle. So then we're talking about that, rehearsing it, and then she said splash, splash, gurgle, gurgle, gurgle. So she has 2 reference points for the different sounds that water makes in different situations. So building on that repertoire, building on that language, building on that experience, I think and connecting it and looping it. And then when I see her mom, I'm like, oh, we talked about water, that water goes splash, splash, and gurgle, gurgle, gurgle. So she's kind of like reinforcing the same things that I'm reinforcing.
Correct.
Yeah,
So that's how it kind of works.
Yeah, interesting though. And I know, Barry, you and I have had conversations about agency in learning. So how do we put that in a nutshell? What does that mean exactly?
Okay. We all work with agency is kind of the ability to there are 3 things you're always encountering. The things you've done in the past.
Okay.
Stuff that has worked for you before. And then you get into a situation, and the mind has the ability to basically remember a new situation as if it was a past event. It's called the remembered present.
It's called what?
The remembered present.
Okay. I've never heard that before. Thank you.
Well, everything like right now you are remembering me as if I was somebody you had interviewed in the past.
Okay.
And so as long as I kind of stay on script, everything goes fine. If I start to deviate, then your mind pays attention to that and moves accordingly.
Okay.
And so what the mind does is, the agency is the ability to look at like what we've done in the past. What are the affordances or the requirements of this current situation, and how to optimize the two.
Okay.
And in most cases what happens in education is that students are so well programmed to know that in the past they've come into the classroom, the teacher's in front, gives them a power standard, says, here's some questions, here's a worksheet, do this, and when you're done, tell me what you did, and then I'm going to give you a quiz on that, and if your quiz says what I've told you, then I'm going to give you a good mark. I'm happy, your parents are happy. So they have learned in terms of to minimize their actual agency in a classroom, because the press of the situation says, we're going to tell you what to do.
Okay.
Okay, and so what happens is that, and this is kind of like one of the areas of research that I became most interested in, was in terms of how do you make education better, is to set it up in a way that individuals are able to exhibit their own agency within that.
Well, to me, it seems like agency is relative to everything that you do.
Oh, yes, that's the only way we exist. I mean, we're agents in all our life, and we basically act on our own behalf optimally in all situations. But
so it's just being present, knowing or thinking like, how could I make this the best situation or scenario possible, basically.
And also, how do you read the environment?
Exactly.
The environment places a big press, and that's what happens in schools. It's the environment puts such a big press on like what happens to people in school settings, that the agency that people execute is the agency that says, I am going to comply with these rigid requirements of the environment.
Okay.
And so the problem is, like, how do we get both teachers and students to understand that they can break out of those and enhance their own learning? One of the best examples, I've many examples working with students, but most of my work has been trying, when I work helping students learn, I help them try to learn, but within the context of enhancing their own ability to be agents of their own learning.
Mm-hmm.
One of those powerful stories that comes to mind is I remember a student I had up at UConn. His name was Kanto. Now, Kanto has quite a story because he was growing up in Albania, and his father was being followed by the secret police there. Because it was, so one night his father came into his bedroom, woke him up, said, throw some clothes and a toothbrush into the knapsack, you're coming with me. Scurried out the door. They went down to they had to walk through their backyard down to the river. They swam across the river, met a car brought them to the coast. They got on a boat, went to Italy, got on a train, went to France, got on a plane, went to Chicago, where there was a strong Albanian community. And so he was then, within the course of 2 days, found himself in a high school in Chicago. Didn't know how to speak English, and was pretty much, foreign to the whole American system. Fortunately for Kanto, he was an outstanding soccer player.
Nice.
And so
he fit in.
So his soccer coach took him under his wing, said, as long as you play soccer and score goals, everything's going to be fine.
Yep.
So Kanto spent most of his days in high school sitting in the coach's office, just like trying to do work, and the coach would tutor him on things. And he ended up graduating, and he caught the eye of the soccer coach at UConn, who gave him a scholarship. He came to UConn and was playing soccer there. And my family connected with him because we used to go to the soccer games, and my two kids would, after the game, they were 4 and 6, climb over the fence, run out in the field, and, play with the soccer players.
Sure.
And they became good friends with Kanto, so they would all kick the ball around. So I, as a professor, offered, I've mostly taught PhD students, but I taught one undergraduate seminar on basically how you can be a better learner, and Kanto came to that. And the project that we had, I used a dissertation format where they gave a research question that says, I want you to go out and interview people, use this interview, and you use the results to say this is how people learn best. And they had like they had to put the results in format, and had in like 4 papers. And so when Kanto handed his first paper in, I think he got like a kind of a low mark on it. And of course, I put a lot of corrections, improvements, what things you could do. And I said, here, take it, and if you want to improve your grade, redo it and hand it back into me. And we will keep doing this until you are satisfied that you've kind of got all the learning you can out of this one experience, which is something similar to the way you do a dissertation format.
Right.
Well, he kind of handed his first paper, and I handed it back, and he took the C grade. And then when he was handing his second one, and he got it back with another C, his friend, Tukis Stavakanitis, was from Greece. They were roommates, and Tukis was a senior, and he said, why are you taking the C? And Kanto said, well, I handed it in and I got that back. And then Tukis said, Kanto, don't you understand what he said? He said, if you want to get a higher mark, he's giving you all this feedback.
Right.
You can go back and redo the paper and hand it back in.
Nice.
He will look at it, give you feedback, give it back to you, and you can keep redoing this until you get an A.
Yep.
And so Kanto did that, and so he did that through the semester. This was when he was a sophomore, and after the semester was over, I saw him in soccer games and and cheer him on, but no more contact with him as a student. One May, when he was senior year, it was May, the semester was over, graduation was coming up, and I heard a knock on my office door, and I looked up, and it was Kanto. I hadn't seen him in 2 years, and he kind of walked in, and he said, Professor Sheckley, he said, I want to, let you know I'm graduating next week. And I said, well, that's really great. And he said, yeah, and I'm graduating with honors.
Wow.
And I said, that's really great. And he said, he said, it's all due to you and the course it took. And I said, I don't understand that because you did all the work. He said, because when I first got in that course, I thought that I was just a C student. And I thought that the difference between a C and an A was a gulf I never could cross.
Mm-hmm.
But you allowed me to like take the papers, hand them in, and you gave me feedback, and I started to see what was the difference in performance in basically scholarship and supporting an argument between a C and an A.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned that in your course. And he said, I started to bring that forward to all my studies. And once I learned the difference between like a C and an A, and I learned that I had the ability to do that. He said, I went out and did it, and I never would have done it unless I had experienced that in your course. And he said, so here I am. I'm graduating with honors. First time anybody in my family has ever graduated from college. And he said, I never would have done it unless I had learned that from you. And what he had learned was a sense of agency.
Nice.
You know, it was a learn of how can he basically take control of his own learning and be an agent of using the resources around him,
Mm-hmm.
you know, to advance his own learning.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what.
No, that's a great story, and
What
that
it
is
means.
a story worth telling. Let me
Yes,
tell you,
yes,
yeah,
yes.
that's an amazing story. And I think the other thing that's really important out of that, if I could take away another thing, is how the relationship between the professor and the student is so important. I taught a couple of classes, adjunct faculty at university level, and people didn't know, you know, I said, talk to the professor, talk to them, ask them, how can I do this better? It's not about the grade, it's about your learning and the learning outcomes that you can achieve. And you and I have had conversations. What do you think, Barry?
I want to pinpoint one thing on the relation.
Okay.
When you look at, I do everything I try to talk about, I always can say, okay, I'm saying this because this is where the research
please,
is.
Yeah.
The teacher-student relationship is one of the most powerful predictors of students' performance.
Wow.
You know, that, you know, you look at effect sizes and stuff, and the average effect size in most educational interventions is about 4/10 of a standard deviation. A teacher-student relationship is about a full standard deviation difference between, you know, a positive versus a negative relationship with a teacher can result in a full standard deviation difference in students' performance. And the term that goes along with that is that the relationship is the conduit or the bridge over which learning flows.
So amazing, so
know.
important. I was teacher's pet every year.
Yeah.
I was very lucky that way. And I think it's really interesting when I talk to people now and I say, did you have a favorite teacher going through school? I'm shocked when people don't pinpoint at least one faculty member. It doesn't even have to be a teacher, does it? It could be somebody like a custodian. I used to work as a speech pathologist, so I had a student on my caseload who had a cleft palate. The custodian happened to have a cleft palate. They were good friends.
Wow,
They took care
wow.
of each other. It doesn't matter, but just having somebody that you can relate to, connect to, is really important. I think is a huge takeaway.
And that's the
with
whole
that.
basis of that movie, The Queen's Gambit.
That's a good movie.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Okay, so we wanted to talk about the difference between being just a learner, being just a student, and being a learner. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure, that's one of the things that this idea of how do you best improve education and how do you help student learners best, you know, got me thinking about looking at the research on self-regulation and reasoning. And there's a term in that research that says people will self-regulate to the task at hand as they understand that task. So in other words, if they think, you know, here's what I have to do, I'm going to regulate to that. And so I was wondering, like, you know, how were students, what was the task students were seeing that they were being confronted with in the classroom, and how were they regulating to that? Because how they understood that was how they were going to regulate it. So I started asking them, and I have actually results over 2,000 of these surveys, but I asked them to say, will you describe a time when you were a good learner? You know, and what was that situation, and what were 3 things that you did? What came out over and over was how passive students were. You know, I think that about 20% of them would say, I was a good learner this one time when I, you know, kind of kept my hands on the desk. I didn't fool around. I behaved, and I kept eye contact with the teacher for the full class period. You know, that was a time when I was a really, really good learner. And about another 40, 50% will say, I was a good learner when I took notes, got my homework and followed directions, got the assignment done on time, and got a good grade on the test. Again, very receptive. And only about 15% of the students would say, I was a good learner in this time when I exhibited curiosity. I had a question. I looked at what I wanted to learn, what I didn't know, and how I could learn more. They kind of took control of that. And when I looked at that, it was, it's like, it was very discouraging when I brought the results, when I do this in various school systems, and I would review it with the administrators and teachers, and the teachers would say, oh my God, look at, these Gen whatever kids, they're just so grade oriented, and they don't know what to do about learning and stuff like that. And I had to work with them and say, no, it's not that. The kids are reacting to the environment that you place them in, because they come in and they fully well know that, I have to sit here, there's the standard, you're going to be up there, here are the questions, here's the worksheet, here's the test, here's the grade. I have to, and they've figured out how, basically what the game is, and they will follow through with it. And I said, if we're going to shift them from being good students, learn, pay attention, take notes, get assignments in on time, and get a good grade, to good learners, take initiative, self-initiate my learning, self-sustain it, exhibit curiosity, find out what I don't know and how I can get there. We have to change the nature of the classroom, and exactly what is the relationship with the student and the teacher, and what are the demands and the requirements of the setting. And so then I started to do the research, on that topic, and first, boy, it was hard, because I ran into so many headwinds, because there was such a change in practice from, when I worked with teachers they were very comfortable saying, I've got my notes, I've got my lesson plans, I know how to do this. Now you're telling me that I have to kind of back off a little bit and give students opportunity to make choices and pursue topics. And it's like, yeah, that's it. And it was a big stretch for some of them.
Well, it seems like more work, probably.
Initially, it seemed more work, but it was a very different kind of work, because it was preparation work. And once they got to their classes, they found out it was much easier.
Right.
Well,
especially a teacher who's been teaching for a couple of years, if they know the subject, the content area, and they have that breadth of knowledge that they need to have, and if they understand the needs of the students, especially if they've had them previously, and know them as learners, then to me it seems like it's a win-win for everybody, because you can kind of step back, allow a little agency, let them explore some of the things that they like to do. Is that correct?
Right. Now, one of the best examples of this, I did work for several years at East Line Middle School, and was working with one teacher there. And what we did was, just talk about one unit we did was the American Revolution. And she used to teach the American, from the explorers down through the early colonies, through the Revolution. And that was kind of a one semester's work. That was a unit. And for each unit, it was who was the explorers, what did Henry Hudson do, why did they name the Hudson River after him, where did Ponce de Leon, and Cortez, and it's like, here's a fact, what did they do, and it was kind of very much, here's a name and whatever.
Well, that's why people don't like history,
Yeah, so what I had, there's some fascinating work in the area of history, Sam Weinberg out at Stanford University, who advocates for teaching students how to think historically, as opposed to teaching them about history. And so I brought his work into this classroom, and I worked with a teacher, and I said, well, how about if we just ask them this one question? How did the United States end up being an independent country, given the fact that it was opposing the greatest military power in the world at the time?
That's a big question.
It's like, what happened, know? And we started to say, let's begin with the explorers, and so what we would have, we worked with a librarian who set up massive things on like the school internet, with videos, electronic books, articles, references, and the school at that time did not have enough computers for the kids, so I wanted to support this, so I gave donations from the school of $20,000 for them to buy computers, because I wanted to demonstrate, you know, what could happen if we did have these computers. And so then we got to the point where the kids start working with the computers. When they came to class, they would have this, we also got a software program for them where they could basically create what's called a system map, where they could put, you know, here's this item, you know, it connects this connects with this, this connects with this. And to develop a set of interrelated events with the central question, you know, how did the United States, you know, become independent?
It reminds me of investigative journalism. It's
Right,
basically what it is, right?
Yeah, we see sometimes the journalists with pictures and things and threads and whatever. I mean, that's what we're doing.
Right.
And so the kids they would come into class every day, and they would have in their own mind, well, I'm interested in, you know, some of the military battles.
Could be anything, right?
So they would be saying, I'm going to look at the military component.
If a girl was interested in what the women did, you know,
And actually, that was an interesting thing that came up, because in the middle of one of the sessions, you know, 4 girls that were in one group together came up and said to the teacher, we're looking at all this stuff, but where are the women?
There you go.
You know, and the teacher.
There's agency, right there.
Yeah, and the teacher said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, everything you've given us. You know, it's all, well, Sam Adams this, Tom Jefferson that, George Washington this, Benjamin Franklin that, whatever. It's just like, you know, there were women in the country, you know, and like, what did they do? Did they not have any part of this? And, you know, the teacher she said, you're right. So what we did is we did some work with the teacher and I and the librarian, and we found this reference point with online diaries of women in the Revolutionary period.
Perfect.
And we told the girls that. And so they actually went in there and they started to reading all the diaries of the women that were left behind in the towns when the men went off in the militia to fight.
Yeah.
And all the tremendous work that they did to not only support their own families, but, you know, to learn how to be the blacksmith, or to be the leathersmith, you know, to keep the town going.
We only have a minute left,
Okay.
and I know I just want you to wrap it up. Like, what was the outcome? What happened at the end?
The students that we did actually comparison between regular teacher and this intervention group. The intervention group basically grew by over a standard deviation in the ability to agency, and
Which
it
is
basically
like 15 points on a standard test, right?
Yeah, it was close to like that on a standard test. That would be more like 40 points.
Wow.
You know, and it just it showed really the change, how you needed to change the environment. The kids would come along with it.
Nice.
You know, and basically to say your response, the constant question and discussion with them was not what are the facts, but how are you being a better learner today?
Well, and I think they'll carry that through with them forever. So thank you, Barry. Thank you for being my guest today.
Okay, thank you. Lots of fun.